Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we are talking Texas Longhorns football, and I am joined by Gerald Goodridge, who is the host of the Longhorn Republic podcast, covering all things Texas Longhorn athletics. And Gerald, we talked last year, and we were a little bit cautiously optimistic about Texas. We're thinking that they were going to have a good season, but it was one of those things where we can't believe it, won't believe it until we see it. Texas goes 12-1. In a regular season in the conference championship, makes the college football playoff, a good step in the right direction for Sark and this team. Are you guys, how are you feeling about entering the SEC year one? How do you think Texas is going to fare? And do you think maybe Texas even has the potential to run the SEC at least this year if you guys can, maybe your biggest contender is Georgia. So how are you feeling this year about entering SEC year one?
Yeah, I feel good. I don't think run the SEC is probably not the way I would put it. I do think Texas has done a lot of the requisite work to get ready for the SEC. I think back to the last time Texas played. I guess before this past year, before the Alabama game in Tuscaloosa, when they went to Fayetteville and just got absolutely run off the field because they were light on both sides of the ball and they just weren't ready to play big boy SEC football. The offensive line was bad, the defensive line was bad and got pushed around, and that was like the top priority for Sark and Kyle Flood, and then Bo Davis, who moved on to LSU. But that was their top priority coming in, was getting the trenches SEC ready. They call me old school, call me old, whatever. I do have some gray in my beard now, but like football, especially in the SEC, is still won and lost in the trenches. And so that's the thing that really gives me a good feeling about the year Texas returns 4 of 5 offensive linemen from a group last year that was really, really good. The one offensive lineman they are replacing was a kid who started in some spots last year when they had to shift some things around, and a guy who honestly pushed for some significant playing time last year. On the defensive line, like, it's hard to ignore the fact that you've got 2 guys that were drafted in the first couple of rounds of the NFL draft that are no longer there. And it seems like Texas is going for like a money ball approach to replacing them, where last year you had Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, your 2 big guys. Now they've got like 7 or so like older defensive linemen that they're just going to kind of rotate in there and try to keep a fresh body in constantly. So those are that's the thing that really makes me feel good. But again, run the SEC is probably not the right way, but I do think Texas has a playoff caliber team. I think Texas, if they can put things together in the right way, if Quinn Ewers can continue to develop on his fundamentals and his ability to lead that offense, and I think Texas has a pretty solid year ahead.
This is a year, if you guys miss the playoff, it's definitely going to be a big disappointment. A little different than the 14 playoff now that we have the 12-team playoff, but still, if anything short of double-digit wins is going to be a disappointment for you guys. But we were talking about this last year, and the reason that you were optimistic about this Texas Longhorns team, we were comparing it to like the Tom Herman teams. And the biggest point that you made to me is that, like, hey, Texas up front on both lines of scrimmage is solid. They have some of the best units in the country, and they are going to be able to push around a lot of these Big 12 teams last year. And I think that's what you guys did for the most part in the regular season. But then we even saw early on in the last 2 seasons when you guys went to Tuscaloosa last year, and when the Crimson Tide came to you guys in Austin, you guys were able to like hold your own in those games too. So you mentioned that there's 4 starters returning on the offensive line. One thing that is not returning for the Texas Longhorns this year on the offensive side of the ball is all of the weapons that helped you guys win the Big 12 last year. Adonai Mitchell's gone. Xavier Worthy's gone. Jonathan Brooks is gone. Jatavian Sanders, the tight end, is gone. Jordan Whittingham's even gone. And then you guys also have already lost CJ Baxter and Christian Clark to season-ending injuries. So it's not necessarily like the best luck right now with the running back position heading into this year. But what has Sark and the staff done to rebuild and retool and kind of reload for these offensive weapons with Quinn Ewers heading into probably his last year with you guys?
Yeah, so they're like 2 different answers, right? For the wide receiver room, it's a mix of, they went in the portal and grabbed some really coveted guys. Isaiah Bond from Alabama. They got Matthew Golden from Houston. They got Silas Bolden from Oregon State. 3 of kind of the more coveted guys in that early transfer window. I guess Golden and Bond, or Golden and Bolden were in that first window, and then Isaiah Bond came later. They went to Alabama and got Amari Niblack at the tight end spot, who's kind of one of those flex-y tight ends. They also have Gunnar Helm, who saw a lot of time last year. Combine that with the talent that was already in the room. Jonte Cook was an elite receiver. DeAndre Moore was an elite receiver. You've got all sorts of young guys that I think they wanted to supplement the young talent with some experienced guys and guys who knew where it was. Texas fans still have nightmares about Matthew Golden because he's part of the reason why Houston almost pulled off that upset last year. So having those guys combined with, back-to-back years of pulling top 2-3 wide receivers in the country, they've got a lot of talent, but they needed some folks that I think had been tested and blooded, especially in the SEC. The running back situation, going into fall camp, I was really confident that Texas had a top 5 running back room in the country, right? They had CJ Baxter, who was the number 1 running back in the state of Florida. They had Jaden Blue, who was at one point the number 1 running back in the country at his class. He sat out his senior year. Some recruiting writers got salty about it and tanked his ratings. That's another conversation for another day. And so he was, again, a great running back. And then they had Jarrett Gibson and Christian Clark. Baxter and Clark obviously going down with injury. Jarrett Gibson was one of the top players in the state of Florida a couple of years ago. Jaden Blue is still an elite talent. He's one of those guys that he was the fastest running back in the country. Turned in this fastest single play from a running back, 22.3 miles per hour on a runaway touchdown last year. So, guy would have gotten pulled over at a school zone running that fast. So, they've still got a lot of talent there, but the margins are really, really thin. They went out and got a graduate transfer from SMU that was not going to play this year. He was kind of still on the market. So they added him to the running back room. They've got some other players that have some positional versatility, some defensive guys that played both ways in high school. So they may see some of them sub in. Jarrett Gibson is still there. He was, again, a 5-star guy last year. Think he'll probably be your red zone kind of goal line running back. So there's still talent there. And I cannot, Texas fans will be mad. Trey Wisner is still in the house. He was a darling last year, made a bunch of plays on special teams, came in late in the spring game, and people got excited about him. 3-star kid. So he's also in the mix. But again, I think the margins get really thin. Thankfully for Texas, they're really used to running a lot of RPOs and kind of quick passes to extend that box and loosen the box a bit and also supplement the run. So there's a couple of different ways that they'll go about it. But ultimately, I'm holding my breath because it's a long season. The SEC is going to be a grind, and one more injury or one more guy get nicked up in that running back room, and things get dicey real fast.
You guys have 15 of 24 returning starters coming back this year. I think the offensive weapons, you got to trust Sark. You got to trust the infrastructure you guys have been building there. I really like the addition of Isaiah Bond. I think he was one guy on Alabama. Every time I'd watch them, he would always stick out, and he made that incredible play in the Iron Bowl, too, that is still haunting Auburn fans and haunting everyone that did not want Alabama in the playoff last year, which is everyone outside of the Tuscaloosa and Alabama areas. So we're looking at this Texas team. You guys went from 5 wins to 8 wins to a college football playoff berth. I am looking at this team, and it's like, hey, what does Texas have to do to take that next step to, be actually like win the national championship? And I'm looking on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm looking at quarterback Quinn Ewers because we saw him 2022, 2023. He made a lot of improvements. The things that he struggled with in 2022, he became a lot more consistent with that last season. And now I think if you're Texas, you have to look at Quinn Ewers to make another jump. My biggest concern with him is what happens when your guys are playing the Alabamas, the Texases, as you guys are playing in week 2 this year, Georgia, as you guys have a matchup in the middle of the season, potentially again in the SEC championship game, and then who knows who you guys are going to play in the playoff. What happens when you guys are playing guys that can, match up with you guys at the line of scrimmage, and the play action doesn't work as much with Ewers? And obviously we have a lot of running back concerns already, as we just covered. What do you think is the thing that could potentially hold this team back? And do you think, or maybe not hold you back, but is the thing that could put you guys over the top to where you are that national champion caliber team?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. One, it continues to be a link between like head, arm, and feet for Quinn Ewers. Like if that link continues to grow, he talked about it in press availability last year and in the offseason. Like he got lazy with his footwork, and that was some of the reason why a lot of those deep balls would float on him or they wouldn't be in the right spot. So continuing to like link the arm, the head, and the feet is going to be a big growth edge for him. I mean, I think you're right. Like it's not going to be, and this is no shot at the Big 12 because Texas was terrible in the Big 12 for a better part of a decade, right? 10 plus years. But like last year, the Big 12 was wide open and Texas really took advantage of that. So I think, again, in the SEC, I think we're past the time of undefeated national champions. I just think that's like the long and short of it. We'll probably see Georgia maybe do it again this year, but or Ohio State, probably one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
But I think outside of that, we have to like shift our expectations on what a successful season looks like. But that being said, I think the big question marks for me, one, can Quinn Ewers continue to develop and can he stay healthy? You know, he's part of the reason why he came back was to prove that like I can go a year without getting injured. So that'll be something to watch. And again, I mentioned it before, but that interior defensive line is something to watch. A big reason why Texas's defense was so good last year was because teams had to account for 700 pounds of man in the middle that are absolutely, again, Byron Murphy was top player off the board. T'Vondre Sweat was a third round pick. Like teams have to account for those guys in the numbers game. And when one player can occupy two blockers, the numbers are in your favor, right? So that's the big thing for me is like, can Texas get a guy like Alfred Collins, who was a 5-star guy coming in, Big Burton Broughton, who was another high 4-star guy when he came in? Are they going to have the same leap that that Sweat and Murphy did a year ago? If they do, look out, you know, SEC. But that's the one thing. And then the secondary as well, the safety position. There was a lot of attrition there. They lost a couple of folks. The transfer portal brought in Andrew Makuba from Clemson to kind of shore up the back end. A lot of talent there, a lot of positional versatility. But again, has this group been able to live up to the ceiling yet on the back end? Those are the things that really concern.
Yeah, you're talking about the undefeated national championship. This is also going to be two, or if you're a 10-2 team, especially in the SEC, you're probably, you know, solidified there in that playoff. So even if you do trip up to like Oklahoma again or Georgia again in the middle of the season, or, you know, maybe Texas A&M late in the year, you guys still probably have a good chance if you know, handle your business for the most part. Before we started recording, you were talking about your week 2 matchup against Michigan, where you guys do go to the Big House in Ann Arbor. Michigan, a lot of people are still high on them because even though Harbaugh left and then a lot of really good NFL talent also left with Harbaugh after this past season, what is making you so nervous about this game? Because I was it raised my eyebrows a little bit when you said that.
I mean, one, going to Michigan is always tough. It's going to be a crazy environment. Those fans are going to be on 11, and that's, you know, it's week 2, so you're still trying to figure out a lot of things that are ironed out. Michigan has one of those pairs like Texas had in the middle of their defense last year, Sweat and Murphy. Michigan has a pair of those dudes this year in the interior of that defensive line. Michigan's going to play good defense. They're going to play really solid defense. They're going to try to paper cut you to death on offense, and that's a recipe for a win. I think. You know, it is a strength on strength matchup there for Texas on the offensive line versus Michigan's defensive line. It's also a unknown versus unknown with the Michigan offensive line and the Texas defensive line. And again, I'm old school. I'm pushing 40 at this point. So like, that's really where the matchup lives and dies for me. And so that's why I'm nervous, because the defensive line for Texas is still untested. The linebackers are going to be good this year, I think. But again, I don't know how this defense is going to hold up. Now, can Alex Orji throw the ball? That's a question that we'll have to answer in a couple weeks, right? Because if Texas can load up the box and force Orji to try to throw it and he can't, then the pendulum swings the other way. But the game could go a lot of ways. Probably part of my nervousness is I sat and watched the Maryland games, and I lived through both Charlie Strong and Tom Herman. So maybe that's just part of why I'm nervous about it. It's just a PTSD kind of thing.
And I just wanted to point that out too. It's not like that's the only game you're nervous about. You're probably nervous about like Georgia coming to town middle of the year. Obviously the Red River rivalry game. That's always kind of a crazy game that gets decided in like weird ways. It seems like every single other year. But I want to talk about the last game that you guys are going to be playing in this regular season. You guys are going to be going to College Station, going to Kyle Field, and this is going to be the reignition of the rivalry between Texas and Texas A&M. What are you expecting in that game? It's got to be like a very intense dogfight, even if Mike Elko, year one, maybe is still kind of having a little bit of growing pains with that team, because that team still doesn't have a lot of talent. Even though Jimbo didn't necessarily win a lot of games, that Texas A&M team with that NAL group and even some of the transfers that Mike Elko brought in, that team is still pretty dang talented. So what are you expecting in that game? Because that feels like that is just going to be an absolute chaotic dogfight to end the year.
Yeah, I wish we got A&M like week 6 rather than the last game of the season, because Mike Elko teams, especially like if you look at that Duke team last year, they kind of built as the year went on. And so I'm curious again. I'm wondering what that team looks like in week 12 or game 12. I guess it's week 13. But like how they grow, how they develop. The other part of that, the flip side of that is, will Connor Wegman still be able to stand up, right? Because he's had injury problems. A&M really hasn't fully addressed their offensive line issues. They're going to have, again, one of the best defensive lines in the country. That's a talented group. They brought back a lot of talent to that. Mike Elko's a defensive guy, so I expect that defense to be really, really good. It could be a dogfight. It really could be like a rock fight, because I think both defenses at that point are going to have their feet underneath them. But again, it's a Mike Elko team. They're going to be tough. They're going to be disciplined. They're going to be fundamentally sound. And that, again, that of all of the rivalries I've been a part of, I was lucky enough to go to some of those games and be there for some of those games. And of all of the rivalry games, it's hard to predict any rivalry game, but that one specifically, it's dudes that like have hated each other since middle school. It's like dudes that played against each other in high school, and now they still hate each other. It is nasty. It's mean. It's unpredictable. And as much as I love to talk crap about A&M, like Kyle Field is one of the hardest places to play in the country. As far as crowd noise, I mean, people have gone in there and won quite a bit, but the crowd's going to be feral. It's going to be wild. It's going to be the day after Thanksgiving, so it's just going to be a weird, odd sense. So there's 1,001 things I could tell you that give me the heebie-jeebies about it. But ultimately, it's a rivalry game. It's your heated rival. And no matter, even if Texas goes 11, if they beat Georgia and lose to A&M, there's still going to be that asterisk on the regular season.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that point too about teams that just build towards the season, and that's kind of a weird thing with rivalry games. I always think that with like my rivalry with Iowa State and Iowa, where if we just flip the Iowa-Nebraska game in the Cyhawk game, like Matt Campbell would probably be like 500 against Kirk Ferentz, because I feel like towards the end of the season, Iowa is always like, they're ready to end the season, and Iowa State, they might stumble against like a G5 school like last year they lost to Ohio, but towards the end of the season, that is when they are at their best. So I'm glad you made that point of the rivalry game, because I think sometimes we only people that are members of the rivalry game think that about like that current situation. So Texas Longhorns, first year headed into the SEC. High expectations year one. Gerald, I think we're out of time here today. Do you want to tell us where we can find all of your work, and we'll head out of here?
Yeah, you can catch all of our Texas Longhorn coverage at Longhorn Pod on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. I still call it Twitter. You can catch us on there, my personal Twitter at GH Goodridge, and then anywhere you find podcasts, the Longhorn Republic.
Awesome, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw here today, make sure you hit that like button. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button. That is the best thing that you could do to help support the show, and it costs absolutely $0. I'd like to thank Gerald Goodridge again for joining us, and make sure you go and follow all of his work, as he mentioned at the end of this interview I did with him. And again, maybe check out the Sports Detective Podcast channel page. You might find some other videos that you like, including the one on your screen right now. Thank you very much for watching. Talk to you next time.